Serious, parents of sociopaths, psychopaths or people who have done terrible things, how do you feel about your offspring? My brother is a sociopath who has spent numerous years in prison jail and has completely destroyed portions of his own family's life at various points. He's now got his act together somewhat, he still lies about things, but my mother has always stood by him and tried to help him. She sees it as love, I have always seen it as codependence. My brother is a sociopath who I haven't spoken to in many years. He is in and out of jail for various things. Financial scams, DUIs, breaking into ex-girlfriends' homes, solicitation of prostitutes. He has changed his MO throughout the years, telling people he is someone that he is not. Heck, if you googled him, you'd see all sorts of articles that he has managed to get himself into saying all sorts of crap. He had hatched a kidnapping plan on my nephew, duped a NASA scientist and many other things. He robbed our parents blind and threatened our father. He takes advantage of everyone in his life and destroys those around him. My mom held on to hope for him for the longest time, but even she eventually told him that he wasn't welcome in their home anymore. He disappeared off the map a couple years ago, but I get contacted by people inquiring about me, lawyers, girlfriends, people he has recently scammed trying to find out more information. He is a scary guy who doesn't have very many limits in what he will do. I was a nanny to a family for 3 years. I have a strong feeling that their youngest is a sociopath. Unfortunately, the parents say he's a fireball and a leader instead of a manipulative, lying, harmful and unemotional child. I hope for them, they open up their eyes and try to help him. I have never met a child like this in all my years as a child caretaker. It's eerie and makes me ill thinking about him, and he's only 6. I know it's super uncool to say, but I think there are, really, actual bad seeds. My brother is in jail. He's adopted, which is only important because it means I can sleep at night knowing that I don't possess the potential that he has. He has ADHS, FAD, odds, rad and is bipolar and very aggressive. He doesn't have a legal note that he's a sociopath since he was put in prison before he was 18. But if you look up the definition, it describes him perfectly. The first time I realized that gave me chills. I could go into detail about him, but the short of it is, I hate him. He's my brother and regardless of how he joined the family, that is a fact. But after he physically shamed children and tried to kill my father, I stopped talking to him. That was 5 or 6 years ago. I've lost count. That boy ruined my family and stole my childhood. Instead of happy memories, I have the memories of our town's cops ingrained in my head. Instead of enjoying childhood, I had to know about my mother trying to kill herself and having my father coming and crying to me while I was barely a teenager. The worst part of it all is watching my parents. For everything my brother did to me, he was just who he was, a manipulative sociopath. For my parents, he was their son and they were doing everything they could do for him. Even after he tried to kill my dad is still his biggest advocate and believes he can change. It is heartbreaking to see. I know my parents are split in emotions depending on the day. Some days they believe he's making progress and will see the light. Those are the hardest as I have to decide whether to remind them he's manipulating them to get what he wants, or if I should let them have false hope. Some days they feel the way I do, that he has driven them to bankruptcy, ruined their futures and made them miss their backburner daughters. Yo, life. This'll probably get buried, but I'm happy to talk more about it if there's any interest. My brother is schizophrenic, a drug abuser and an alcoholic. His schizophrenia was not diagnosed for a long time and as a result he wasn't properly treated until very late in his life. Growing up with him was a nightmare. He would physically assault my sisters and I. He would steal money. He would take our bikes and wreck them. He would destroy things that he knew we liked. He would get raging drunk, stoned etc and launch into violent episodes every holiday. Heck, all the time, but the holidays really got him going. It once took 6 cops to wrestle him into submission to be hauled off to get medical mental treatment. The best parts of my childhood, pre-getting my license, were when his butt was in various mental institutions. It meant we finally had peace in the house. The list of hurts, assaults, thefts, attacking any friends we allowed over, goes on and on and on, and it is very hard to fully articulate what it was like growing with him. I could list dozens and dozens of hurts that evil sack of crap did to my sisters and I, and each would not do justice to describing the living heck it was to deal with him. I have read stories about people having abusive parents and it is the same sort of thing. My parents were divorced and my mom did her best, but what can one do with that? When you have to work all day and all you want to do at the end of the day is crash? The only good part of it all was that he consumed all of my mother's energy, so I was completely unsupervised, and when I got my license, I got myself a car and I was pretty much never home after. In the summer I would split for weeks. As a 16-year-old I drove to the Outer Banks of North Carolina from Charlottesville, VA. It is about a 3-4 hour drive, with nowhere to stay, and lived out of the car, crashing at friends' places, sleeping on porches of vacation homes for about a week. I did this with very little money and with no one knowing I had done it other a few friends I hung around with. I actually had a ton of fun in high school, and when I got to college I loved life. Mental illness is a serious disability and living with a disabled person is a freaking nightmare. Hey, my brother was this trifecta too. He was 16 years older than I am but lived in our house until I was 16 years old myself. I loved him and he could be very cool and interesting sometimes, but there were definitely some scary times. Didn't help that he was 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighed around 250 pounds at the time, which was much bigger than anyone else in the house. I was on a state superior court grand jury for 3 months. During that time I heard every single piece of evidence about various people like that and sat there as their parents cry their eyes out admitting that everything said about their child is true. We were just supposed to listen to evidence and vote on it, but I don't want to meet a person whose life wouldn't be changed like mine was from listening to those testimonies. I'm legally barred from discussing any of the cases themselves. But to hear some of the things that people have done to their parents like that, and to actually see the parents and family members who were wronged completely in tears talking about how someone they love so dearly could wrong them so much, was just heartbreaking. I had to take almost a month off work after that was over because I just wasn't myself. It had that profound of an impact on my life to hear these things and see the victims who want nothing but the best for this person but realize that they do need to follow the law and tell the truth about what happened. All I can say is that although I can't say I know what it's like firsthand to be the victim of someone I care deeply about who has absolutely no remorse for anyone, I can say that the stories I heard have affected my faith in humanity somewhat and still have a very lasting impression on me years later. To anyone who has ever had to deal with something like this firsthand, my heart truly goes out to you. I'd like to say things will be better. I truly would. But unfortunately I can't, and it's actually bringing tears to my eyes just typing this. I truly don't know how anyone could live with someone like that and put up with it so long. But that just means you are much stronger than I am and you have my utmost respect. Thank you very much for your candor and insight. I have a cousin who I'm afraid might be a sociopath. I guess a lit of it is the way she was brought up. Her stepfather used to beat her mother in front of her. This sort of abuse went on for years. The stepfather eventually left not before forcing the mother to take out a $20,000 loan. That was the only way he would leave them alone. When she was 11 years old, her mother was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer. Doctors gave her 2 months to live. She died 2 weeks later. At the time I was living in the same household. Shortly after, my cousin began to physically attack my grandmother. There was some money that had gone missing. It was a couple $100 to help pay for the funeral. At first she denied taking it, but eventually we got it out of her. When all of this was happening, it was just 4 of us in the household. My aunt, her new husband, my cousin and myself. When my aunt passed, she had only met her new husband a couple years prior. I was 21 years old at the time, so at the wishes of her mother we sent my cousin to live with some family in another state. Things didn't get any better. There's been a couple of times where money has gone missing, like over $1,000. She bullies her younger cousin to the point that she doesn't want to come out of her room any longer. Constantly tries to manipulate and drive a wedge between her new caretakers. Ditching school, trying to bring boys over, and just flat out behaving badly. I live close by now and I've talked to her, tried to get her to open up with mild success. I believe that maybe kids like this just want to be heard, so I listen. Not only that, but I've also made a promise to her mother that I would look after her. I really hope she makes progress because they just don't know what to do with her anymore. They're talking about sending her away to some school for troubled kids far away. I try and not to talk about these things because it bothers me just thinking about. Stresses me out when I'm at work. I just needed to take this off my chest, even if it is to strangers on the internet. If you've read this far, thank you for listening. Not really the same thing, but my dad was diagnosed on 2 separate occasions as a sociopath. Being his kid was weird. As long as you did whatever he wanted, he was okay to you. If you didn't follow his plan, he ignored you or worse, beat you. He was incredibly manipulative and you didn't even realize it until it was too late. He was very charming and most people thought of him as a great guy. He was even a little league coach in my small town. In the end, he cheated on my mom multiple times, ended up leaving my family and essentially cutting contact except to sometimes play head games with us. It definitely messed me up for a long time. Recently, the daughter of the woman he married contacted my sibling and wanted to talk about him and his behavior. I don't think she knows. Not a parent, but I'll tell you about my sister. It all started when she turned 13. My mother decided that was old enough to watch me without her being there. I am about 2 years younger than her and have always been underweight small. She took full advantage of this as she commanded me around like a slave and beat me mercilessly every day until I turned 15. There were days where she would be nice, but most I will never forget. She'd unhook the phone from the wall so I couldn't call my mom for help. She'd lock me in my room and then remove the doorknob so I couldn't leave. She tossed the only toy I had left from when my mom and dad were married to the dogs and let them chew on it just to get to me, to watch me cry. I remember at one point I had had enough. Told her I'd rather die than stay with her. She decided to hold a knife to my back. Told me to say the word and she'd do it. Once I had turned 15, I became her alibi instead. Just another tool to her. When she'd sneak out, I'd feign ignorance when my parents asked about her whereabouts. She'd get me to help her steal by carrying stolen merchandise in my purse. Anything and everything she wanted or I'd get hit hard. She eventually left home and got knocked up at 18 with some kid my age, 16. While pregnant, she seemed to get better. Her anger and tantrums of rage stopped. She cared for me almost like a second mother even apologized for all the crap back when I was little. I had hope for her. It didn't last. After the baby was born, she slowly reverted back into that person. The criminal, the druggie, the bully. My mom and stepdad's kindness had run out by the time she turned 20 and still mooched off them. No job. Spent all her tax returns and boyfriend's money on crap they didn't need. We had to formally evict them. My sister said before leaving, "We have plenty of places to go. We just stayed here to frick with you." Before she left, she took all my mother's pictures of her and shredded them. From baby to the last day she stayed here. I'm glad I don't have to see her or her boyfriend's faces anymore, but I feel bad for her little boy, that he has to grow up with parents like that. Everyone is just a potential tool to my sister, and when you outlive your usefulness to her, you'll know. As a parent of someone who was diagnosed with a mental illness fairly young, I can give you my thoughts. There is a grieving process that happens. You love the child you brought into the world. At some point, that child changed. In our case, it was during elementary school. The grown woman who I gave birth to 24 years ago is not the same person I once knew and loved. So I miss the sweet child I knew and I do my best to protect myself and those I love from the woman she became. Ultimately, as a parent, I kept her alive until she was 18. Technically, that is where my job stopped. Don't get me wrong, I did a ton over the years. She spent the vast majority of her life 9-17 and various long-term residential treatment centers that were provided to us via special education. By the time she turned 18, she had been in treatment for over half her life. No, not just medication or only medication. They do a lot for these kids to try and keep them out of residential treatment centers. Once she turned 18, it became time for me to take care of myself, and part of that requires me to put my safety first. For the record, she is and was my only child. My ex-husband and his current wife have 5 children. To my knowledge, one of them is also very unstable, for lack of better words. TLDR, you separate the person from the illness. You grieve the child you once knew and love. You figure out how to protect yourself from them when they turn 18. I worked as a nanny for one family for 3 years. The girl was 9 when I started and the boy was 5. The boy is autistic and I'm fairly certain the girl is a sociopath. The girl would constantly torture her brother with things she knew would drive him mad. This isn't normal sibling fuckery either. She took it to a whole new level, to the point he would physically rip his hair out and scratch his face and body trying to get her to stop. But to make things worse, she can switch in a second to being all sweet and loving. So her brother still adores her. She treated everyone around her as objects, and if they didn't do what she wanted, she would either completely disengage or hurt them. The first time she told a complete lie about to her parents because I didn't do what she wanted. They let me know that the first time she threw someone under the bus was when she was 4. No amount of lessons about treating others kindly get through to her, and the look she gets on her face when hurting others is terrifying. She got so bad by the time she turned 12 that I had to quit. Puberty just magnified everything. Her parents are pushovers and let her get away with anything. She doesn't want to go to therapy, so she doesn't have to. I'm afraid of what she'll become when she gets older. I recently went to my friend's graduation party where I met her 11-year-old cousin. For the entirety of the party she chased my friend's dog around, saying how she was going to throw it into the pool. I didn't think it was a big deal, but then her dog hid under my chair. Now keep in mind, this dog has chased off bears and mountain lions and generally doesn't take crap from anything. But she was hiding. Finally the cousin sees her and comes over to ask if I'll hand her over. I ask why and she answers that the dog deserves to die. She then spent the next 10 minutes describing how she plans to do it. First breaking the legs, then slowly suffocating her with carbon dioxide from dry ice after locking her in a cage. She described this in a totally straightforward voice. No emotion, not even excitement on her face. I immediately tell my friend about it. After making dang well sure that the dog wouldn't be touched, my friend blew me off the first few times. Her cousin started talking about her plans to kill herself, which centered primarily around stabbing pens into her eyes and bleeding out slowly. I tried to tell my friend again, but she just said that her cousin had always been like that and that the family couldn't afford the drugs that would get their daughter under control. There is no doubt in my mind that this girl is going to kill someday. It wouldn't surprise me in the least if she ends up being a serial killer, and frankly I'm not sure there's anything to do about it short of locking her in a mental hospital and never letting her out. Let's hope her first victim kill her first. I keep seeing a lot of people cite bipolar disorder as a reason for psychopathic or sociopathic behavior. Please keep in mind that bipolar disorder may be a comorbidity, but it is not a sole reason for these disorders. Bipolar is apparently very much misunderstood by the general population. My current roommate is a complete sociopath. I hope people don't think I'm using that term lightly. I've never seen someone use and discard people so flippantly. I truly hurt for some of the people that he ensnares because I am one of them. He's very charming at first. However, once you see through his games and he knows it, he becomes a vindictive and spiteful person. Luckily he is moving out on the 1st. I have a friend whose son is definitely a sociopath. From a very young age he gave signs of it. His father, who left them soon after he was born, was a criminal who slapped and choked my friend. So I think there is something to the nature side of things being as important as the nurture part. Anyway, when he was very little he would lie all the time about anything and everything. He started hurting animals when he was probably about 8. He developed serious drug problems in his early teens. I convinced his mother to put him into rehab to help with his addiction. While in there, the psychiatrist diagnosed him with borderline personality disorder. He blamed me for putting him there and told me in the most blood-curdling way that he hated me and would get back at me. I moved away from them several years ago. His mother told me the latest news was that he was convicted of physically abusing, not shaming, his girlfriend's little kids. He is in the state pen now. I believe some people are born no good. I was friends with a girl named Betty when I was a kid. Her parents owned a weekend home next door to my dad's house, and we would hang out together on occasion whenever our visits coincided. She was adopted, a little socially awkward and immature for her age, but otherwise seemed normal enough. When we were both around 16 she just stopped showing up. No one mentioned why. Whenever I asked about Betty her parents would get a grave look on their faces and just say she can't come this weekend. Well, after I had asked a few times and unwittingly made everyone uncomfortable, my dad pulled me aside and told me to stop asking about Betty. Apparently at 16, she decided she wanted to find her birth mother, and her parents helped her to do so. Her birth mother was an alcoholic who had a 17-year-old son living with her, Betty's half-brother. Betty befriended the 17-year-old son and they started an odd, semi-romantic relationship. The son convinced her that they needed to be together, and that her adoptive parents were standing in the way. They were rich, and if Betty killed them, she could inherit everything and provide for him and her real mother, and they could all be together. Betty agreed to do this. Together they began crafting a shoddy murder plot. They were going to wait until the parents were sleeping, stage a break-in, and stab them to death in their beds. Some of the planning was done by Betty while at school, and was overheard and reported to the proper people. Betty was confronted with the plot, got upset, and ran away. And since she had been planning on killing her parents, the parents decided not to try real hard to find her, and to change the locks. I think as time has passed she has made some efforts to get back in contact with them, but I don't know how successful she was. I really kind of got the sense they had washed their hands of her. My son is locked up in another state because he ran away and got in trouble before he had to face trial in our home state for stealing cars. It is killing me. He is actually a very sweet kid who just can't stay out of trouble. He has a drug and alcohol problem, but it is even more than that. He has uncontrollable impulsivity. If he wants something he has to have it even if he has to steal to get it. I am sad about things he has done, but I still love him and there is a big hole in my heart from missing him. I believe my step cousin is a sociopath. He lived by my grandparents because they are old and thought it would be nice to have younger family around. After he graduated high school he began stealing from them. It started off small, guns, jewelry, the likes, and eventually turned into more expensive things and money. Grandpa wanted to throw him out. Grandpa knew he wasn't going to change. Grandma wouldn't have it though. She loved him. I should preface this by saying both of my grandparents are Baptists. She firmly believed Jesus would help him. Grandpa knew otherwise. The stealing continued. He started taking her neck pills. He started doing hardcore drugs. Grandpa threatened to kick him out again. My cousin begged and promised he'd stop doing drugs. He'd get clean. He'd get a job and sober up. Grandpa didn't believe it, but because he loved Grandma and she believed him, he allowed it. Grandpa passed away last year with pancreas cancer. My cousin stayed with my grandmother to help her through her depression. At this point we all believed he was actually clean because he had a job, just bought himself a new motorcycle, was actually on track to having a new life. We were all completely wrong. Not even a month after Grandpa passed, my cousin began using drugs again. Come to think of it, he probably never even stopped. He stole money from her. I'm not talking petty money either. He stole $13,000 from my grandmother's bank account because he knew her debit card info and managed to get it from her purse. Grandma found out. She breaks down. Other family calls the cops. She gets a restraining order. He takes off. No one knows where he is. I hope one day justice is served. For my grandmother's sake. I'm a psychopath. As a kid I used to joke that I was a robot because I didn't seem to feel the way other people felt. My parents had been concerned from a young age about the vacancy of my feelings, but I guess they had just hoped it would get better as I had more life experience. It did not. I learned to imitate emotions and as I grew older developed some very shallow understanding of empathy that I used to blend in. However, there is a switch where I just power down in a sense and completely detach. I didn't go off the rails. I did well in school, got a good job, live well. I don't have any real relationships. I've been told I'm charming, which is how I pull people in. I like to study them, learn about them, and I keep note if it's of use to me. I create dependence and cut them off to see how long they'll survive and if there is anything worth going back for. I go through people like they are playthings, or am falsely nice to them until I get whatever it is I wanted from them. The people that I keep in my life are there for use or amusement. I have always had impulse control issues and have a lack of risk aversion that had resulted in a gambling problem. I have lied and manipulated family and friends into give me money to when I've needed to pay off debts. They all know they should give up on me but they don't. But I'll look at them, and I feel nothing where there should be something. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.